A 7-year-old girl threw herself in front of an armored motorcade in the middle of a storm-flooded mountain pass, begging a legendary crime lord to save her mother from being hanged. She had no idea that Cashin Thorne hadn't saved anyone in a decade. Until tonight. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Before we begin, please click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. If this story gripped you, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will leave you speechless. I've got another thriller dropping tomorrow that you won't want to miss. And before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with you all across the globe. Now let's get into it. The rain came down like judgment that night, hammering the mountain pass in sheets so thick the wipers couldn't keep pace. It drummed against the armored convoy's roof, turning the world beyond the windshield into a blur of gray steel and violence. Water rushed across the asphalt in churning rivers, carrying debris from higher elevations down into the valley below. The air tasted of ozone and cold stone, sharp enough to cut. Nothing should have been moving in weather like this. Nothing except the 3 black SUVs cutting through the deluge like knives through silk. Then she appeared. The little girl emerged from the torrent like an apparition, her yellow raincoat glowing against the darkness. She stood in the center of the flooded road, both arms raised above her head, palms open toward the oncoming vehicles. Her small frame swayed in the wind, but she didn't move. Didn't run. She planted her feet and waited as 3 tons of armored steel bore down on her. Inside the lead vehicle, Cashin Thorne watched through bulletproof glass as his driver's foot hovered over the brake. The convoy slowed, tires hissing through standing water, until all 3 SUVs sat idling in formation. Headlights carved through the rain, illuminating the child in harsh white light. Her face was streaked with mud and something darker. Her legs trembled beneath her. Cashin Thorne was a man who moved through the world with the heavy grace of a winter storm, inevitable, cold, unstoppable. His eyes, slate gray and measuring, had watched empires crumble and men beg. He wore power the way other men wore cologne, and in the criminal underworld his name was spoken in careful whispers. They called him the architect of silence. For a decade he had operated on a simple principle. Emotions were structural weaknesses that got people killed. Behind him, 2 of his enforcers reached for their door handles. Cashin raised one hand. They froze. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He made the choice himself. The door opened. Rain invaded the cabin. Cashin Thorne stepped out into the storm and looked down at the child collapsing at his feet. Her voice barely carried over the downpour, but the words landed like bullets. "They didn't just take her," she sobbed, her fingers clawing at his coat. "They hung her on a tree." For the first time in 10 years, Cashin Thorne felt something crack inside the fortress he'd built around his chest. Jax was already speaking before Cashin could process the weight of the child's words. "Boss, we need to move. This is exposure. Could be a setup." His voice carried the clipped efficiency of a man trained to see threats in everything, including 7-year-old girls in yellow raincoats. Cashin didn't answer. He crouched slowly, bringing himself level with Lila's mud-streaked face. Rain hammered against his shoulders, soaking through the fabric of his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. Up close, he could see the rope burns circling her wrists like cruel jewelry, the way her chest heaved with exhaustion that went beyond running. This child had been fighting for hours, maybe longer. "Where?" His voice cut through the storm, low and certain. "The old orchard," Lila gasped, her words tumbling over each other. "Past the ridge. They said if she told them where my dad hid the money, they'd let her go. But she doesn't know. She doesn't know anything." Her small hands twisted in the fabric of his coat, anchoring herself to the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and violent. Behind them, the second SUV's door opened. Marcus emerged, rain already darkening his suit jacket. He was Cashin's strategist, the man who calculated angles and probabilities while others pulled triggers. Cashin, we don't have confirmation. This could be bait. The Chechen crew has been looking for an opening since the port deal went south. Cashin rose to his full height, lifting Lila with him. She weighed nothing, all bone and terror and desperate hope. He handed her to Jax, whose expression flickered with something that might have been surprise before discipline locked it down. How long? Cashin asked the girl. 2 hours. Maybe 3. Lila's voice cracked. She was still breathing when they made me run. 3 hours. If the girl was telling the truth, Sarah Vance had maybe 20 minutes of consciousness left, possibly less. Cashin had seen hangings before, knew the mathematics of suffocation when a body was suspended at an angle designed to maximize pain while delaying death. It was a torture technique favored by sadists who wanted answers and enjoyed the extraction. We have a meeting with the Vancouver buyers in 40 minutes, Marcus continued, his tone carefully neutral. Walking away costs us $2 million in product placement. Following this into an unsecured location costs us more than money. It costs predictability. The second you become unpredictable, you become vulnerable. Cashin turned, rain streaming down his face, and looked at Marcus with eyes that had gone flat and cold. Cancel Vancouver. Boss. Cancel it. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. Jax shifted his weight, still holding Lila against his chest. The enforcers from the third vehicle had formed a perimeter, weapons concealed but ready, their eyes scanning the tree line for threats that hadn't materialized yet. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. In 10 years, you've never made a move that wasn't calculated. This is emotion, Cashin. You taught me that emotion is how men die. Cashin felt something twist in his chest, something that had been dormant so long he'd forgotten the shape of it. He'd built an empire on the principle that caring was a liability, that the moment you valued something beyond profit, you handed your enemies a blade and showed them where to cut. He'd watched men fall because they loved their children, their wives, their reputations. He'd made himself untouchable by making himself empty. But standing in the rain, watching this child's fingers turn white from gripping Jax's jacket, Cashin realized he'd been starving for a decade. Not for food or wealth or power. For a reason to use what he'd built for something other than accumulation. The architect of silence doesn't make exceptions, Marcus said quietly. That's the whole point. Cashin walked to the lead SUV and opened the trunk. Inside, secured in custom foam cutouts, lay enough firepower to level a small compound. He reached for a tactical vest, began strapping it across his chest with practiced efficiency. Then tonight, he said without turning, the architect learns a new design principle. He pulled a sour from its holster, checked the magazine and chambered a round. The sound of metal on metal cut through the rain like a promise. When he turned back, his face had transformed into something his enemies would recognize. The expression of a man who had stopped calculating odds and started calculating casualties. Jax, you're with me. Marcus, take the third vehicle and set a perimeter at the ridge access road. Anyone comes out that isn't us, you put them down. He looked at Lila, who was watching him with eyes too old for her face. Where exactly is this orchard? I can show you, she whispered. No. Cashin's voice softened for the first time. You stay here. You've run far enough. He climbed into the SUV's passenger seat, rain still hammering the roof like applause or judgment or both. Jax secured Lila in the back with one of the enforcers, then slid behind the wheel. As the convoy began moving again, splitting formation as Marcus peeled off toward the ridge, Cashin stared through the rain-blurred windshield into the dark throat of the mountain pass. Somewhere ahead, in an orchard that memory and rot had claimed, a woman was dying for information she didn't have. And for the first time in 10 years, Cashin Thorne was driving toward something that wouldn't make him richer, wouldn't expand his territory, wouldn't add another layer of insulation between himself and the world. He was driving toward the person he used to be before he learned that caring was the fastest way to bleed. The orchard announced itself through smell before sight. rot and wet bark and something chemical that didn't belong in nature. Cashin killed the headlights 200 yards out, letting the SUV coast to a stop behind a collapsed barn that leaned into the darkness like a drunk searching for a wall. The rain had softened to a steady whisper, which meant sound discipline mattered now. Every footstep, every breath, every mistake. Jax was already out, moving with the fluid silence of a man who'd spent 20 years turning violence into geometry. He pulled night vision goggles from his tactical pack, swept the tree line, then raised 2 fingers. 2 hostiles visible. Cashin nodded and drew his sidearm, screwing a suppressor onto the threaded barrel with 3 efficient turns. They moved through the orchard like smoke through ruins. The trees here had given up on fruit years ago, their branches twisted into arthritic claws that scraped at the sky. Fallen apples rotted in black piles among the weeds, releasing sweet decay into the rain-scrubbed air. Cashin's boots found purchase on moss-slick ground, each step placed with the care of a man disarming a bomb. 50 yards in he saw the light. A battery-powered lantern hung from a low branch, swaying slightly in the wind. Its glow carved a small theater from the darkness, a circle of illumination that contained all the cruelty the world could manufacture. In the center stood a gnarled apple tree, older than the others, its trunk thick as a man's torso. And from one of its branches 15 feet up hung Sarah Vance. They'd rigged her with climbing rope, the kind designed to hold weight without slipping. It circled her throat and ran up through a pulley system, allowing her captors to adjust the tension, to lift her onto her toes or drop her into suffocation depending on how cooperative she felt. Her hands were bound behind her, her face obscured by hair that hung in wet ropes. She wasn't moving, wasn't making sound. The only proof of life was the shallow rise and fall of her chest, irregular as a failing engine. Beneath the tree, 2 men sat on overturned crates, smoking cigarettes and sharing a thermos of something that steamed in the cold. They wore surplus military gear, mismatched and worn, the uniform of men who'd learned violence in official capacities before going freelance. One of them was talking, his voice carrying through the orchard in careless fragments. Should have just capped her when the kid ran. Voss is gonna be pissed we let. The other one laughed, a sound like gravel in a disposal. Kid won't make it off the mountain. Even if she does, who's she gonna tell? Cops? Her daddy stole from the vultures. Cops don't care about dead thieves. Cashin felt Jax tense beside him, waiting for the signal. But Cashin was counting. Counting the seconds Sarah Vance had left. Counting the distance between cover and target. Counting the cost of hesitation measured in oxygen deprivation and brain damage. The math was simple and brutal. They had to move now. He raised 3 fingers. On 3. 2. They broke from cover simultaneously, weapons up, moving through the darkness with the inevitability of a storm front. The first hostile died before he could register movement. Cashin's suppressed round punching through his temple and dropping him off the crate like a puppet with cut strings. The second man was faster, younger, his hand already moving toward the rifle propped against the tree. Jax shot him through the throat. The man went down clutching his neck, blood streaming between his fingers, his mouth working soundlessly as he tried to scream through a windpipe that no longer functioned. He thrashed in the mud for 5 seconds, then went still. The only sounds were rain on leaves and Sarah Vance's labored breathing. Cashin was already moving to the tree, holstering his weapon and pulling a folding knife from his vest. He looked up at the rope system, tracing the mechanics of cruelty. The pulley was anchored to a branch above Sarah's head. The working end of the rope was tied off to a stake driven into the ground 15 feet away. Cut the wrong line and Sarah would drop the full 15 feet with the noose still around her neck. Her cervical spine would shatter on impact. "I need slack," Cashin called to Jax. Slowly. Jax moved to the stake, began letting out rope with the careful precision of a man defusing ordnance. Sarah's body lowered inch by inch, her toes touching ground, then her heels. When she had 6 inches of slack in the noose, Cashin climbed onto the crate and reached up, supporting her weight with one arm while sawing through the rope with the other. The blade was sharp. The rope was synthetic. It parted with a soft whisper, and Sarah collapsed forward into Cashin's arms. He lowered her to the ground as gently as the moment allowed, feeling how cold she was, how her skin had gone the color of old paper. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and full of animal terror. She tried to speak but only managed a wet, rattling sound. "Don't talk," Cashin said, his voice carrying a gentleness that surprised him. "Your daughter is safe. You're safe. We're leaving." He pulled the noose over her head, revealing the deep groove it had carved into her throat. The tissue was swollen and angry, already bruising purple-black. Jax appeared with a thermal blanket and a medical kit, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd kept too many people alive who should have died. Sarah's hand shot out, gripping Cashin's wrist with surprising strength. Her lips moved, forming a single word that barely qualified as sound. "Lila." "Alive," Cashin confirmed. "Waiting for you." Sarah Vance closed her eyes, and for a moment Cashin thought they'd lost her. Then he felt her pulse beneath his fingers, weak, thready but present. She was a fighter, just like her daughter. Behind them, the orchard settled back into silence, holding its dead like secrets it would never tell. Sarah Vance wasn't breathing right. The rhythm was all wrong, shallow gasps that stuttered and caught like an engine misfiring before it died completely. Cashin had seen enough death to recognize its approach, the way a body began negotiating terms of surrender with the universe. "Jax, get Torres. Now." His voice carried the flat urgency of a man who understood that seconds mattered more than miles. Jax was already on the radio, his voice clipped and efficient. "Torres, we need you at the orchard. Critical airway. You've got 2 minutes." He didn't wait for confirmation, just started packing the medical kit with the items Torres would need immediately. Airway adjuncts, oxygen, whatever could buy them time. Cashin pressed 2 fingers against Sarah's carotid. The pulse was there but fading, a distant drum beat growing quieter with each measure. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint that looked wrong against the pallor of her skin. Petechial hemorrhaging spotted her face like dark freckles, burst blood vessels from the pressure of strangulation. Then the world opened up with gunfire. The first rounds came from the eastern tree line, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like camera bulbs at a crime scene. Bark exploded from the tree behind Cashin's head, spraying splinters across his shoulders. He dove over Sarah's body, covering her with his own mass as Jax returned fire, his suppressed weapon coughing controlled bursts into the shadows. "Contact east, multiple hostiles." Jax's voice remained steady even as he moved, using the ancient apple tree as cover, his shots precise and measured. Cashin's mind calculated trajectories and odds with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive for 2 decades. For shooters, maybe 5 weapons unsuppressed, which meant either confidence or stupidity. They had the high ground but not the discipline. They were spraying rounds in full automatic, the kind of fire that sounded impressive but rarely hit what you aimed at. "Torres, how long?" Cashin spoke into his radio, his body still shielding Sarah. 30 seconds. "I'm coming in hot from the west." Torres's voice was breathless, the sound of a man running through hostile territory with a bag full of medical equipment. A round punched into the crate beside Cashin, sending wood fragments spinning into the lantern light. The battery-powered lamp swung violently on its branch, casting manic shadows that turned the orchard into a fever dream. Jax dropped one of the shooters. Cashin heard the body crash through underbrush, but the others kept coming, kept firing, their rounds chopping through the darkness with lethal intent. Then Torres was there, sliding into cover beside them like a runner stealing home. He was compact and efficient, a former army medic who'd traded combat zones for higher pay and fewer rules. His hands moved before his body stopped moving, already reaching for Sarah's throat, assessing damage with practiced fingers. "Severe laryngeal trauma, possible tracheal collapse," Torres muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He pulled a penlight from his pocket, pried open Sarah's mouth, checked her airway. She's got maybe 3 minutes before her throat swells shut completely. Can you intubate? Cashin asked, still covering them while Jax methodically eliminated threats. Not here. Too much trauma. I need to do a crick. Torres was already pulling a scalpel and a specialized tube from his kit, the tools for a cricothyrotomy, an emergency procedure that involved cutting directly into the windpipe through the neck. More gunfire erupted, closer now. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. Boss, you've got 2 vehicles approaching from the access road. We're engaging, but they're pushing hard. This was what Cashin had feared, not a random torture session but bait in a larger trap. The vultures had known someone might come. They'd planned for it, positioned shooters, prepared a kill box. And he'd walked right into it because a 7-year-old girl had grabbed his coat and made him remember what it felt like to be human. Do it, Cashin told Torres. We'll buy you time. Torres didn't hesitate. He positioned Sarah's head, extending her neck to expose the throat. The scalpel caught lantern light as he made the first incision, a precise vertical cut through skin already bruised and swollen. Blood welled dark against Sarah's pale skin. Cashin rose from cover, his weapon finding targets with mechanical precision. He dropped one shooter, then another, each shot placed with the cold certainty of a man who'd stopped counting bodies years ago. Beside him, Jax's rifle barked in steady rhythm, creating a perimeter of violence that nothing could cross. Torres worked with the focused intensity of a man performing surgery in a hurricane. His fingers were steady despite the gunfire, despite the impossible conditions. He deepened the incision, pushed through tissue and membrane until he reached the cricoid cartilage. Then he inserted the tube, a small plastic conduit that would bypass Sarah's damaged throat and deliver air directly to her lungs. Tubes in, Torres announced, already connecting a bag valve mask. He squeezed the bag once, twice, forcing oxygen into Sarah's starving body. Her chest rose, fell, rose again. The rhythm was mechanical, artificial, but it was rhythm. It was life. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, wild with pain and confusion and the primal terror of not being able to breathe on your own. Torres leaned over her, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sarah, listen to me. You have a breathing tube. Don't fight it. Let the air come. You're going to be okay. Whether she believed him or not, her body seemed to accept the truth. Her chest continued its artificial rise and fall, color slowly returning to her lips. We need to move, Cashin said, already calculating their exit. Can she travel? She doesn't have a choice, Torres replied, wrapping the wound site with gauze. But we're on borrowed time. That tube can dislodge. Her airway can still close. We need a hospital or a surgical suite within the hour. Cashin looked down at Sarah Vance, at this woman who'd refused to betray her dead husband even when it cost her everything. He thought about Lila waiting in the SUV, about promises made in the rain, about the man he used to be before he learned that caring was the fastest way to bleed. Then we stop borrowing, he said, lifting Sarah into his arms with surprising gentleness. And we start taking what we need. The Iron Gate didn't announce itself with signs or markers. It simply existed where the mountain road ended, a fortress carved into living stone that looked like it had been waiting since the earth cooled. 30-foot walls of reinforced concrete rose from the cliff face, studded with cameras that tracked movement in thermal and infrared. The main entrance was a vehicle gate thick enough to stop a rocket, flanked by automated turrets that remained hidden until something crossed the threshold uninvited. Cashin's convoy approached through a gauntlet of motion sensors and pressure plates, each one feeding data to a security hub buried 3 levels underground. The gate recognized the vehicle's transponders and opened with hydraulic silence, revealing a courtyard lit by sodium lights that turned the rain into falling gold. Sarah lay across the back seat, Torres monitoring her vitals while squeezing the bag valve mask in steady rhythm. Her eyes were half open, glazed with pain and pharmaceutical fog. The breathing tube protruded from her throat at an angle that looked wrong no matter how you tried to make sense of it. Lila hadn't moved from her position wedged between Jax and the door. She'd watched the orchard firefight from the relative safety of the SUV's interior, her small hands pressed against the bulletproof glass, her face reflecting muzzle flashes like a child watching fireworks. Now she stared at the fortress with eyes that had stopped processing wonder or fear, eyes that had seen too much and understood too little. The moment the vehicle stopped, she was out. Her yellow raincoat was streaked with mud and someone else's blood, her braided hair coming loose in wet tangles. She ran to the rear door as Torres and 2 medical staff extracted Sarah on a collapsible stretcher. "Mom." The word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. "Lila, we need space." Torres's voice was gentle but firm as the medical team wheeled Sarah toward a reinforced door that led to the compound's surgical suite. "Your mom needs help right now. The best thing you can do is let us work." Lila didn't listen. She tried to follow, her small legs pumping to keep pace with the stretcher, but one of the medical staff, a woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, intercepted her. "Sweetheart, your mom is going to be okay, but you can't come in there. I promise we'll take good care of her." Lila twisted away, her face crumpling with the kind of devastation that belonged to adults, not children. She spun, searching for something familiar in a world that had become incomprehensible. Her eyes found Cashin. He stood beside the lead SUV, rain streaming off his shoulders, blood spatter darkening his tactical vest. He looked like exactly what he was. A man who solved problems with violence and precision, who'd built an empire on the principle that nothing mattered except power. But when Lila ran to him, when she crashed into his legs and grabbed fistfuls of his coat with desperate hands, he didn't move away. "Don't let them take her," Lila sobbed into the wet fabric. "Please don't let them take her again." Cashin looked down at this child who'd stopped a convoy, who'd run barefoot through a storm, who'd grabbed hold of a monster and demanded he become something else. He felt the weight of her trust like a physical thing, heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. "They're doctors," he said quietly. "They're going to help her breathe properly. Make her strong again. I want to stay with you." Lila's voice was muffled against his coat, but the words landed with absolute clarity. Jax appeared at Cashin's shoulder, his expression carefully neutral. "Boss, we should get the girl cleaned up, fed. Maybe one of the staff can." "No." Lila's grip tightened. "I stay with him." Marcus emerged from the second vehicle, surveying the courtyard with the practiced eye of a man who saw threats in negative space. He caught Cashin's gaze, raised an eyebrow that contained an entire conversation. "This isn't protocol. This isn't how you operate. This is weakness taking root." Cashin ignored him. He reached down and lifted Lila into his arms, feeling how light she was, how her small body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder, and for the first time in hours her breathing steadied. "All right," Cashin said. "You stay with me." He carried her toward the main entrance, past the security checkpoints and biometric scanners, into the heart of his fortress. The interior was all polished concrete and steel, minimalist and cold, designed by a man who valued function over comfort. But there was a fireplace in the main room, and Cashin headed for it now, lowering himself into a leather chair with Lila still attached to him like a barnacle. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions. She just held on, her fingers twisted in his shirt, her breathing syncing with his in the way children do when they found something solid in a world gone liquid. Jax brought a blanket and draped it over them both without comment. Someone else brought hot chocolate that Lila ignored. The medical team worked behind sealed doors, fighting to stabilize a woman who'd been hanged for information she didn't possess. And Cashin Thorne, the architect of silence, the man who'd spent a decade making himself untouchable, sat in front of a fire with a 7-year-old girl sleeping against his chest. Outside, the rain continued its assault on the mountain. Inside, something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of his carefully constructed world. Marcus stood in the doorway watching. After a long moment he spoke quietly. "The vultures won't stop. They'll track us here." "I know," Cashin replied, his voice barely above a whisper so as not to wake Lila. "This changes everything. Your reputation. Your operation. Your survival." "I know that too." Marcus nodded slowly, accepting what couldn't be changed. "Then I'll start preparing the defenses." Cashin looked down at the child sleeping against him, at the mud still streaking her face, at the rope burns circling her wrists like brutal bracelets. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who'd chosen power over humanity, efficiency over empathy. That man would have driven past her in the rain. That man would still be untouchable, invulnerable, alone. "Good," Cashin said. "Because when they come, I want them to understand something they've never had to consider before." "What's that?" "That some fortresses aren't built to hide behind." Cashin's voice hardened into something sharp enough to cut stone. "Some fortresses are built to kill from." The security hub was 3 levels down, carved into bedrock that predated human civilization. 16 monitors covered one wall in a grid of surveillance angles, each screen cycling through camera feeds that watched the mountain from 100 different perspectives. Marcus sat in front of them like a conductor before an orchestra, fingers dancing across keyboards as he reviewed footage from the past 2 hours. Cashin descended the steel staircase with Jax behind him, leaving Lila asleep under guard in the main room. The girl had finally released her grip on his shirt after 2 hours, her body surrendering to exhaustion that went bone deep. He'd waited until her breathing fell into the heavy rhythm of true sleep before extracting himself, moving with the care of a man defusing something precious. "Show me," Cashin said, his voice echoing off concrete walls. Marcus didn't turn, just tapped a sequence of keys. 4 monitors went dark, then lit up with new footage. Perimeter camera 12, approximately 90 minutes ago. The screen showed the access road 3 miles down the mountain, rendered in the green-gray wash of night vision. At first, nothing moved except rain and wind-blown branches. Then a figure appeared at the edge of frame, moving with the cautious efficiency of a man who understood he was being watched but couldn't quite see by whom. The figure paused, crouched, examined something on the ground. When he looked up, the camera caught his face in 3/4 profile. Young, maybe 30, with the lean build of a distance runner and eyes that reflected infrared light like an animal's. "That's Cade," Jax said quietly. "Tracker for the vultures. Ex-military reconnaissance specialist. If you need to find someone who doesn't want to be found, he's your asset." Marcus advanced the footage. Cade straightened, then gestured behind him. 2 more figures emerged from the tree line, followed by 3 more, then a dozen. They spread out in a standard tactical formation, weapons held ready, moving upslope with the disciplined patience of men who'd hunted before. "They're following the blood trail from the orchard," Marcus explained. "Sarah was bleeding from the cricothyrotomy site. Torres did his best to control it, but in a moving vehicle at those speeds." He let the sentence die. They all understood. Blood had dripped from the SUV's undercarriage, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to the iron gate. Cashin watched the figures advance, counting heads, noting weapon profiles. "How many total?" "Thermal shows 18 confirmed hostiles in the immediate vicinity. Could be more hanging back watching our response." Marcus switched to a thermal camera that painted the mountain in shades of orange and blue. Bodies glowed like small fires against the cold backdrop. "They're setting up observation posts at elevation. Classic siege preparation. They're not rushing in." "Because they're smart," Jax added. "They know what you're capable of. They're taking their time building a picture of our defenses before they commit." Marcus brought up another feed, this one from a camera hidden in a false tree trunk half a mile out. The image showed a vehicle, an older model pickup with mismatched panels and mud-caked wheel wells. In the truck bed sat communications equipment, the kind of mobile command center you could pack in 15 minutes when things went wrong. A figure stood beside the truck, speaking into a satellite phone. He was tall and angular, his face gaunt in the monitor's glow. Even through the grainy footage, Cashin could see the way the other men deferred to him, the way they maintained a respectful distance. "That's Kalen Voss," Marcus said. "The Vulture's operational commander." Former Special Forces, dishonorable discharge for unauthorized use of force against civilians. Started the Vultures as a freelance wetwork team, evolved into something worse. He doesn't just kill for money. He kills for the story it tells. Cashin had heard of Voss before in the way you hear about diseases you hope never to contract. The man was a sadist with a philosophy, someone who believed terror was the purest form of communication. He'd once crucified an informant on a billboard overlooking the interstate, turning murder into theater. What's he doing? Cashin asked. Making calls. Bringing in reinforcements most likely. Marcus isolated the audio, but the distance and weather rendered it useless. Just static and broken syllables. He's planning something big. This isn't a recovery operation anymore. Jax moved closer to the screens, his reflection ghosting across the monitors. He knows who you are. Has to. Which means he knows hitting you will make a statement. Take down the architect of silence and every crew from here to Vancouver will hear about it. It's not about the woman anymore. It's about proving he can breach your fortress. Cashin watched Kalen Voss pace beside the truck, animated in conversation, his free hand cutting through air as he made points to whoever was listening on the other end. This was a man who saw the world as a stage, every action a performance designed to inspire fear or respect or both. He's wrong about one thing, Cashin said quietly. What's that? Marcus asked. He thinks this is a fortress to breach. Cashin's voice dropped to something cold and final, the tone of a man who'd made peace with violence. But fortresses are passive. They wait for the siege. They hope the walls hold. He turned away from the monitors, started back toward the stairs. Behind him, the screens continued their silent vigil, watching figures move through the darkness like ghosts assembling for a haunting. I'm not waiting for the siege, Cashin continued, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. And I'm not hoping anything. The Vultures came to this mountain thinking they were hunting a woman and a child. Now they're going to learn what it feels like when the mountain hunts them back. Marcus and Jax exchanged glances. They'd served with Cashin for years, had seen him dismantle operations and eliminate threats with mechanical precision. But this was different. This had weight behind it, momentum that felt less like strategy and more like gravity. How many men do we have inside the compound? Cashin asked. 32 combat-effective personnel, Marcus replied. Another dozen support staff with firearms training. Good. Cashin paused at the top of the stairs, his silhouette framed against the dim light from the main level. Because when they come through those gates, I want enough people standing behind me to turn this compound into a graveyard. The Vultures wanted to send a message by hanging Sarah Vance. So we'll send one back. In a language even predators understand. Above them, rain continued hammering the mountain. Below, on the security monitors, Kalen Voss ended his phone call and smiled at something only he could see. The war had already begun. Both sides just hadn't started bleeding yet. Cashin found Jax in the armory, methodically checking magazines and laying out weapons with the precision of a man who understood that ammunition was the difference between philosophy and corpse. The room smelled of gun oil and cold steel, lit by fluorescent tubes that turned everything the color of surgical instruments. Rows of rifles hung on the wall like expensive art, each one worth more than most people earned in a year. Jax didn't look up when Cashin entered, just continued his inventory with practiced efficiency. I've got enough ordnance to hold this position for 72 hours under sustained assault. After that, we start making choices about what we can afford to waste. We won't need 72 hours, Cashin said, closing the door behind him. The sound echoed in the concrete space, final as a coffin lid. Now Jax looked up, his weathered face unreadable. You planning to surrender or die? Neither. I'm planning to end this before they dig in. Cashin moved to the workbench, picked up a magazine, felt its weight. How long have you worked for me? 8 years, 4 months. Jax's answer came without hesitation. Why? In that time, have I ever made a decision based on emotion? Jax considered this carefully, the way he considered everything, as if his life might depend on the accuracy of his assessment. No. You've always been mathematical. Well, that's why people fear you. You don't get angry. You don't get invested. You just solve problems. That's right. Cashin set the magazine down, turned to face his enforcer directly. So when I tell you this fight is different, I need you to understand I'm not speaking from sentiment. I'm speaking from structural analysis. Jax's expression shifted slightly, curiosity breaking through professional neutrality. I'm listening. For a decade I've operated on a single principle: power without attachment. I built this empire by making sure nothing mattered more than the operation. No loyalties that couldn't be severed. No relationships that couldn't be sacrificed. I made myself untouchable by making myself empty. Cashin's voice remained steady, clinical, as if he were describing someone else's pathology. It worked. I became the most feared operator in 3 states because everyone knew I had nothing to lose. And now? Jax prompted. Now I understand that was the weakness, not the strength. Cashin pulled out a chair, sat down across from Jax. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous, but he's also predictable. He'll always choose survival. He'll always calculate odds. He'll always take the path that preserves his operation. He leaned forward, his slate-gray eyes holding Jax's. But a man with something worth dying for? That man becomes chaos. That man stops playing by rules you can predict. Jax set down the rifle he'd been inspecting, gave Cashin his full attention. You're talking about the girl. I'm talking about realizing I've been starving myself. Cashin's hands opened, empty palms up, as if showing he had no weapons hidden. Every person I refused to care about, every connection I severed, every time I chose efficiency over humanity, I thought I was making myself stronger. I was wrong. I was just building a bigger cage. Boss, with respect, caring about people gets you killed in this business. I've seen it happen. Hell, you've ordered it to happen. I know. And I'm not suggesting we start running a charity. Cashin stood, walked to the wall of weapons, traced a finger along a rifle barrel. But there's a difference between professional detachment and complete isolation. I confused the two. Thought if I could eliminate all attachment, I'd eliminate all vulnerability. You did eliminate vulnerability, Jax countered. That's why the vultures are outside and you're in here, fortified, alive. Am I? Cashin turned, and for the first time Jax saw something he'd never witnessed in 8 years. Uncertainty. Not doubt about tactics or strategy, but something deeper. I've been alive, Jax. But I haven't been living. There's a distinction. Jax stood slowly, understanding they'd crossed from operational briefing into territory that required different protocols. What changed? One girl stops your convoy in the rain and suddenly you're re-evaluating your entire philosophy. Not suddenly. That's the point. Cashin's voice gained an edge, not anger but intensity. It's been building for years. Every deal that meant nothing. Every threat eliminated that left no impression. Every night in this fortress surrounded by people who work for me but don't know me. He gestured toward the ceiling, toward where Lila slept. That child grabbed my coat and demanded I become something other than what I'd built myself into. And I realized I wanted to. That I'd been waiting for an excuse. An excuse to what? To care. To make yourself vulnerable. To matter. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. For 10 years I've been significant. Important. Feared. But I haven't mattered. Not in any way that would leave a mark on the world beyond criminal profit margins. Cashin moved back to the workbench, placed both hands flat on its surface. When Sarah Vance dies, if she dies, her daughter will remember her forever. Will grieve her. Will carry her memory like a stone in her chest for the rest of her life. When I die, who grieves? Who carries my memory? What mark do I leave except empty bank accounts and business arrangements that dissolve the moment I'm gone? Jax was quiet for a long moment, processing. So this is about legacy. No. It's about realizing that legacy requires witnesses. Requires people who see you as human, not as function. Cashin looked up, met Jax's eyes. You asked why this fight is different. It's different because for the first time in a decade, I'm not fighting to preserve my operation. I'm fighting to prove to myself that I can still be more than what I've become. That there's still something human underneath all this architecture. And if you're wrong? If caring about that girl and her mother gets you killed. Cashin smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth but somehow wasn't cruel. Then at least I'll die having felt something in my last days besides the weight of my own isolation. The vultures think they're laying siege to a fortress. But fortresses are just prisons you build yourself. Tonight I'm breaking out. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Get the men ready. Jax. If this goes badly, if I make a choice that compromises the operation because I'm prioritizing those two people, I need you to be willing to overrule me. To preserve what we've built, even if it means sacrificing them. Will you listen if I do? Cashin considered the question with his usual precision. I honestly don't know. Which is exactly why I need you ready to make that call. He left the armory, leaving Jax alone among the weapons and the weight of understanding that the most dangerous man he'd ever known had just admitted to being afraid of something that couldn't be killed with bullets. The first breach came at 2:47 a.m., announced by a soft chirp from the security console that barely qualified as sound. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up thermal feeds from the eastern perimeter. 3 heat signatures moved against the fence line, their movements synchronized and professional. They're cutting through Sector 7, Marcus said into his radio, his voice carrying the flat calm of a man reporting weather. Bolt cutters looks like. They'll be through in 90 seconds. Cashin stood in the main security hub watching multiple screens at once, his mind processing tactical data with the efficiency of a machine built for exactly this purpose. He'd spent the last 3 hours positioning his people, setting fields of fire, creating overlapping zones of control that would turn the compound grounds into a maze where every wrong turn led to a bullet. Let them through, he said. Jax, positioned on the roof with a thermal scope, came through on comms. Boss, we have clean shots from elevation. We can drop them now. Negative. Let them think they're succeeding. Cashin zoomed in on one of the monitors, watching the 3 figures work their way through the chain link. They're scouts. Advanced team checking for immediate response. If we kill them now, Voss pulls back, regroups, comes at us with a different strategy. I want him committed. The fence parted with a metallic whisper lost in the rain. 3 men slipped through the gap, weapons up, moving in a tactical wedge formation toward the outer buildings. They were good, professional discipline in every step, proper spacing, one man covering while the others advanced. They made it 40 feet before the first trap triggered. The Claymore mine had been positioned at knee height, angled to catch anyone moving along the most obvious approach vector. When it detonated, 700 steel balls traveling at 4,000 feet per second turned the lead man into something that used to be human. The blast was a flat crack that echoed off the mountain, followed immediately by screaming. The 2 survivors dove for cover, but Cashin had anticipated that too. The second Claymore was positioned exactly where training would tell them to seek shelter. Behind a storage shed that looked like protection but was actually a kill funnel. It detonated 3 seconds after the first. The screaming stopped. Contact at Sector 7, 3 hostiles eliminated, Marcus reported, his tone unchanged. On the monitors, the heat signatures had fragmented into cooling pieces. Cashin watched the screens, waiting. On thermal, the mountain lit up with new signatures. The main force reacting to the trap, adjusting their approach. They'd been holding back, letting the scouts probe for exactly this kind of defense. Now they knew. Now they adapted. Here they come, Jax's voice crackled through comms. I count 15, maybe 18, spreading out across the northern and eastern perimeters. They're moving faster now, not bothering with stealth. Because they know we know they're coming, Cashin said. Voss is done being cautious. He's angry about losing his scouts. Good. Angry people make mistakes. The next wave hit 3 positions simultaneously, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm defensive response. Men poured through the fence line at sectors 4, 7, and 9, weapons firing even as they moved, Suppressive fire meant to keep defenders' heads down while they advanced. But Cashin's defenses weren't passive. Remote-operated machine guns, hidden in hardened positions and controlled from the security hub, opened fire with mechanical precision. Tracer rounds cut through the darkness in burning lines, and men went down screaming or silent depending on where the bullets found them. One of the vultures made it to the outer courtyard, running in a serpentine pattern that spoke of combat experience. He'd almost reached the main building when motion sensors triggered a series of floodlights, turning night into day with brutal suddenness. The man froze, blinded, and one of Cashin's rooftop shooters put a round through his chest. "They're not breaking off," Marcus observed, watching the thermal feeds. "They're taking casualties but still pushing forward. This isn't normal tactics." "Because Voss doesn't care about his men," Cashin replied. "He cares about the story. Every man who dies here is just another verse in the ballad he's writing." He keyed his radio. "All units, conserve ammunition. They're testing our response, measuring our capability. The real assault comes after." As if summoned by prophecy, the gunfire stopped. The mountain fell into sudden silence, broken only by rain and the wet sounds of dying men. On the monitors, thermal signatures retreated, dragging their wounded back toward the tree line. Cashin counted. 18 had attacked. 9 were retreating. 9 bodies cooled on his grounds, their heat signatures fading to match the ambient temperature. A 50% casualty rate would break most units. But the vultures weren't most units. "Damage assessment," he commanded. Reports came in from around the compound. 2 minor injuries from shrapnel, no critical wounds. The defenders had held their positions, maintained fire discipline, let the defenses do their work. The fortress had performed exactly as designed. But Cashin felt no satisfaction. This was just the opening movement, the part where both sides established the rules of engagement. The real fight was still coming. "Movement on the access road," Jax reported. "Vehicles approaching 3, no 4. They're not trying to hide." Cashin switched to the long-range cameras, zoomed in on the approaching convoy. Heavy trucks, the kind built for commercial construction, moving up the mountain road with the inevitability of a glacier. In the lead vehicle, visible through the windshield, sat Kalen Voss. Even at this distance, through rain and darkness, Cashin could see him smiling. "He's bringing up reinforcements and heavy equipment," Marcus said. "Boss, he's not trying to breach the fortress anymore." "No," Cashin agreed, understanding flowering cold in his chest. "He's planning to bring it down." The truck stopped just beyond the gate, idling in the rain. Their headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the killing ground where 9 of Voss's men lay in pieces. A door opened. Kalen Voss stepped out, tall and angular, wearing the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no by anyone who survived the conversation. He looked directly at the camera he knew was watching, smiled wider and raised one hand. In it he held a radio. Cashin's own radio crackled to life, Voss's voice emerging smooth and cultured, the accent of private schools and opportunities squandered. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Let's discuss terms before this becomes any more expensive for both of us. You have 5 minutes to respond before I start using the explosives I brought." Tick-tock. The radio went silent. On the screens, Voss climbed back into his truck and waited, patient as a snake deciding when to strike. Cashin looked around the security hub at the faces watching him, waiting for orders. He thought about Lila sleeping upstairs, about Sarah fighting for breath in the medical wing, about fortresses and prisons and the difference between surviving and living. "Get everyone to hardened positions," he said quietly. "And somebody wake up the girl. If this compound comes down, I want her in the bunker 3 levels underground where concrete and bedrock can't reach her." The 5-minute deadline had started. The Garden of Wolves was about to bloom with fire. Cashin walked through the main gate alone, his weapon holstered, hands visible and empty. Rain hammered his shoulders as he crossed the killing ground where bodies still leaked heat into cold earth. Behind him, the iron gate stood silent, its automated defenses tracking his movement but holding fire. Ahead, Kalen Voss leaned against his truck, backlit by headlights that turned the rain into silver needles. "Bold," Voss called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Suicidally bold, actually. My men have rifles trained on you from 4 positions. One word from me and you become an interesting collection of holes. Then say the word." Cashin kept walking, his pace steady and unhurried. "But you won't. Because killing me from distance doesn't give you the story you want. Doesn't let you look into my eyes and see fear. Doesn't make the legend." Voss's smile widened. He pushed off the truck, walked forward to meet Cashin in the middle ground between their forces. Up close, he looked exactly like his reputation. Handsome in a way that spoke of privilege, with eyes that held the flat shine of a man who'd mistaken cruelty for strength so many times he could no longer tell the difference. "The architect of silence," Voss said, stopping 10 feet away. "I've heard stories about you. How you dismantled the Chechen operation without firing a shot. How you negotiated the port deal by simply explaining what would happen if anyone declined. You're famous for being reasonable. For finding the mathematical solution to every problem." "I am reasonable," Cashin replied. "Which is why I'm going to give you a choice you don't deserve." "Oh." Voss's hand rested casually near his sidearm. "Let me guess. I leave, you keep the woman and girl, and we all pretend this didn't happen?" "No. You're not leaving. You came to my mountain, hung a woman for entertainment, and sent a child running through a storm. You made this personal before I ever stepped out of my vehicle." Cashin's voice remained level, conversational, as if discussing weather patterns. "The choice is how you die. Fast or slow. Dignified or screaming." Voss laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. "You're standing in the open, outnumbered 5-1, with enough explosives pointed at your fortress to turn it into a crater. And you're threatening me." "I'm not threatening. I'm explaining." Cashin took 1 step closer. "Your men aren't watching you right now, Voss. They're watching my fortress, waiting for countermeasures, calculating angles of fire. You're so focused on the story you want to tell that you've forgotten the most basic rule of warfare. Which is, never hunt something that's better at killing than you are." The words were still hanging in the air when Cashin moved. Not with the explosive speed of panic, but with the fluid efficiency of a man executing a movement practiced 10,000 times. His hand went to the small of his back, found the compact pistol concealed there, brought it up in one continuous motion. Voss was fast, special forces training evident in the way he reached for his own weapon. But fast wasn't enough. Cashin's first shot took him in the right shoulder, spinning him sideways, destroying the arm reaching for his gun. The second shot punched through his left knee, dropping him into the mud. Somewhere behind the headlights, men were shouting, weapons were being raised. Cashin ignored them. He walked forward until he stood over Voss, who lay in the rain clutching his ruined shoulder, blood streaming black in the artificial light. "You wanted a story," Cashin said quietly, crouching beside him. "Here it is. A man came to a mountain thinking fear was the same as power. Thinking reputation could substitute for skill. He tortured the innocent, threatened children, and believed his legend would protect him." Cashin pressed the pistol against Voss's forehead, cold metal against wet skin. He was wrong. "Wait," Voss gasped, pain and comprehension finally catching up to ego. "The architect of silence doesn't wait. That's the whole point." The shot was quiet, suppressed, barely louder than the rain. Voss's head snapped back, then forward, and he collapsed into the mud with all the ceremony of a discarded puppet. Cashin stood, turned to face the trucks where 15 rifles were now aimed at his center mass. He held his pistol loosely, aimed at the ground, and raised his voice to carry over the storm. "Your commander is dead. His plan dies with him. You can try to complete his mission, kill me, maybe breach the fortress before my people cut you down. Some of you might even survive. Or," he paused, letting the word hang heavy with possibility, "you can walk away. Get in your trucks. Drive down this mountain. Tell everyone you meet that Kalen Voss came for the architect of silence and learned why silence is the last sound predators hear." The rain filled the silence that followed. Cashin could see men in the truck beds, their weapons steady but their faces uncertain. They'd signed up for a siege, for overwhelming force against a static target. They hadn't signed up to watch their commander executed in the mud while standing helpless. One by one the rifles lowered. A voice called out from the lead truck, rough with anger and resignation. "This isn't over. The vultures are bigger than one man." "Then send your best," Cashin replied. "Send your worst. Send everyone you have. But send them knowing that this mountain has already eaten your commander and barely noticed the taste." He holstered his weapon, turned his back on 15 armed men and walked toward the iron gate. Every step was an eternity, every breath a calculation of odds and probabilities. Behind him he heard engines starting, gears engaging, the sound of men choosing survival over revenge. The trucks turned around, their taillights disappearing down the mountain road like red eyes blinking closed. Within minutes the night swallowed them completely, leaving only rain and bodies and the smell of gunpowder fading into wet earth. Cashin reached the gate, passed through into the courtyard where his people waited with weapons still ready. Jax appeared at his shoulder, his expression carefully neutral. "That was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the stupidest." "Both," Cashin agreed. "Usually are." Marcus emerged from the security hub, tablet in hand, already analyzing the aftermath. "Thermal shows them retreating, no signs of regrouping. Perimeter is secure. We have 9 friendly wounded, none critical. Enemy casualties." He glanced at the screens, at the cooling signatures scattered across the grounds. 22 confirmed. Cashin looked back through the gate at Kalen Voss's body, already being reclaimed by rain and darkness. A man who'd built his reputation on fear, who'd believed theater could substitute for substance. In the end he died the way all predators eventually die, encountering something higher on the food chain. "Get a recovery team out there," Cashin ordered. "And someone contact whatever passes for the Vulture's Central Command. Tell them their commander's body is available for pickup at the base of the mountain. No charge. Professional courtesy." He started toward the main building, toward where Lila and Sarah waited, toward the human reasons he'd fought this fight. Behind him the iron gate began to close, hydraulics whining softly as steel met steel. The fortress had held. But more importantly, the man inside it had finally broken free. The rain stopped at dawn, as if the mountain had finally exhausted its capacity for violence. Cashin stood at the window of the medical wing, watching pale light creep across the compound, revealing the cost of the night in mud and brass casings and dark stains the rain hadn't quite washed away. Recovery teams moved through the grounds with body bags and trauma kits, their movements efficient and somber. Behind him, Sarah Vance breathed on her own for the first time in 18 hours. Torres had removed the cricothyrotomy tube at 5 a.m., replacing it with a proper tracheostomy that would heal cleaner, leave less scarring. She lay propped at 45 degrees, her throat wrapped in sterile gauze, her eyes open but distant, processing trauma that would take years to fully surface. Lila sat in a chair beside the bed, holding her mother's hand with both of hers, as if afraid Sarah might evaporate if she let go. The girl hadn't left the medical wing since they'd brought Sarah up from surgery. She'd fallen asleep twice in that chair, woken disoriented, seen her mother still breathing and relaxed back into vigilance. "She's going to make a full recovery," Torres said quietly, appearing at Cashin's shoulder with a tablet full of vitals and prognosis. "The vocal cords are damaged. She'll sound different when she can speak again, raspier, but structurally everything will heal. She's lucky. Another 10 minutes and we'd be having a very different conversation." Cashin nodded, still watching the morning spread across his mountain. "When can they travel?" 48 hours minimum. 72 would be better. The tracheostomy needs time to stabilize, and she's still weak from blood loss and shock. Torres hesitated. Where would they go? Somewhere the vultures can't follow. Somewhere their old life doesn't matter anymore. Cashin turned from the window, looked at the woman and child who'd rewritten a decade of his carefully constructed philosophy by simply refusing to die quietly. I'm giving them new identities. Documentation that will hold up to serious scrutiny. Money that doesn't have strings. A house in a place where questions don't get asked. That's expensive. For people who can't pay you back. I know. Torres studied him with the frank curiosity of a man who'd worked for Cashin long enough to recognize when something fundamental had shifted. You're not doing this for tactical reasons. This isn't about eliminating loose ends or buying loyalty. No, Cashin agreed. I'm doing it because for the first time in 10 years, I understand the difference between price and value. He walked to Sarah's bedside, aware of Lila's eyes tracking him with that unsettling intensity children develop when their world has been torn apart and reassembled wrong. Sarah's gaze focused on him slowly, recognition sparking behind the pain medication fog. Thank you. The words were barely audible, pushed through damaged tissue that protested every syllable. Her hand moved slightly, a gesture toward Lila. "Pie daughter is safe," Cashin finished. "Will stay safe. Both of you will." He pulled over a chair, sat so they were at eye level. "Your husband stole from the wrong people. Made enemies who don't forgive and don't forget. The vultures lost their commander last night, but the organization is bigger than one man. They'll come again eventually, looking for closure or revenge or just to prove they can." Fear flickered across Sarah's face. Lila's grip on her mother's hand tightened. "Unless," Cashin continued, "Sarah and Lila Vance cease to exist." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on the bedside table. "New birth certificates. Social security numbers that trace back to real hospitals, real records. Driver's license, passport, complete digital footprint. You become someone else. Someone boring. Someone the vultures would never think to look for." Sarah's eyes moved to the envelope, then back to his face. "Why?" The question cost her, each letter dragged across damaged vocal cords. Cashin was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain something he barely understood himself. "Because you reminded me that some things can't be calculated in profit margins. Your daughter ran into a storm and grabbed a monster's coat and demanded he remember how to be human. She succeeded. That has value I can't quantify but can't ignore." He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "There's a house in northern Oregon. Small town, population 1,200, where the biggest crime last year was teenagers knocking over mailboxes. It's already purchased, furnished, stocked. The deed is in your new name. When Torres clears you for travel, my people will drive you there. You'll never see me again. You'll never owe me anything. You'll just live." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "You don't have to. Just take your daughter somewhere safe and teach her that the world isn't only full of people like the ones who hung you. Teach her that sometimes strangers stop when you need them to. That sometimes monsters choose differently." Lila stood suddenly, walked to Cashin with the purposeful stride of a child who'd made a decision. She looked up at him with eyes that had aged decades in 2 days. "Will you be okay?" she asked. "After we leave?" The question landed with unexpected weight. Cashin crouched, bringing himself to her level for the second time since they'd met in the rain. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I'm better than I was before you stopped my car." Lila studied him with that unnerving intensity, then nodded as if satisfied. She threw her arms around his neck in a brief, fierce embrace that felt like both goodbye and forgiveness. Then she returned to her mother's bedside, climbing back into her chair, resuming her vigil. Cashin left the medical wing without looking back. Outside, the compound was already being restored to operational status. Crews repairing the fence, technicians recalibrating sensors, cleaners removing evidence that 22 men had died on these grounds. By evening it would look like nothing had happened. The fortress would be pristine again, impenetrable again. But Cashin understood now that fortresses were just expensive ways of staying alone. He found Marcus in the security hub, reviewing footage and writing after-action reports. His strategist looked up, read something in Cashin's expression and waited. "I'm taking a week," Cashin said. "No operations. No meetings. The business runs itself for 7 days. And after that? After that we make some changes. Start investing in things that matter beyond quarterly returns. Find ways to use what we've built for more than accumulation." Cashin moved to the window overlooking the valley, watching morning spread across the mountain in waves of gold and amber. The architect of silence was a good design for survival. "But I'm tired of just surviving." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We'll adapt. That's what we do." Cashin stayed at the window as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last remnants of storm. Somewhere below, in the medical wing, a woman breathed and a child kept watch, and both of them would soon disappear into ordinary lives where their biggest concerns would be school schedules and grocery lists and all the beautiful mundanity that people took for granted. He'd given them that. Had spent a night in violence and calculation to purchase their freedom. And in exchange they'd given him something worth infinitely more. Proof that the fortress he'd built around his heart had a door, and he still remembered how to open it. The mountain had survived the storm. So had the fortress. But the man inside, the architect of silence, had finally learned that some structures were meant to be dismantled from within. Thank you for watching. Want to show me some love and keep the videos coming? Simple: like and subscribe. Ready for the next thrill? Click on the video popping up on your screen right now and enjoy more. See you in the comments.